Aidan Hutchinson. The guy Brad Holmes took at number 2. Even as a Michigan fan who's watched all your games and is just rooting hard for you to succeed, I just gotta say, just about Brad Holmes picking you at number 2, how do I say this? That he absolutely made the right decision, and I stand by it. Now, this take may come as a surprise to some of you, because it's obvious that Aidan Hutchinson has not played great this year. He didn't have a sack last week, and really in just 1 half out of his 8 has he looked like a stud football player. That's reality. But let me ask you this. For those of you saying, we need more out of the number 2 overall pick, has Trayvon Walker looked like a number 1 overall pick? No. Has Derek Stingley looked like a number 3 overall pick? Absolutely not. Has Kayvon Thibodeau looked like a number 5 overall pick? Not from what I've seen. So what I'm getting at is, we could have taken any of those guys, and they would not be doing any better than Aidan Hutchinson has done. I can tell you that straight up. And what that tells me is, this might not have been the best draft class. And Hutchinson was the prettiest girl at 2 a.m., if we're being honest. If you wanted Myles Garrett, you wanted the next TJ Watt, that guy didn't exist in this draft. I said that Aidan Hutchinson could be a Max Crosby type player, and I still think he absolutely can do it. But here's the thing. So we know that Hutchinson is not Myles Garrett. So he has good burst, but not elite burst. He has good strength and physicality. Actually pretty darn good, but he has below average arm length, which, definitely is a downer. So what's the thing I still like about him that made him worth the number 2 overall pick? That's his change of direction. His 3-cone drill was one of the best out of a defensive end in NFL history. Outside of just his very strong frame, his ability to change direction is absolutely incredible. And I don't think the Lions have been using him for his strengths. You watch Aidan Hutchinson, he's relying way too much on bull rushing, and it's just not working. Now, he's not getting blown back. He is blowing some offensive tackles back. And I will say, if our secondary was just a little bit better, I think he'd have a couple more sacks. But the reality is, Aidan Hutchinson is not the kind of player that he can be right now, because he's not being used for his skill set. You watch his Michigan highlights, a lot of his sacks actually came when he rushed up the field and then made some sort of move inside. So he would do a spin move, he would do a club and a rip, something like that. And watching his NFL highlights, I haven't really seen him do that. I've seen him try to win outside, and I've seen him try to bull rush. Those are really the 2 things I've seen him try to do, and they've come with pretty mediocre results. But the fact is, that's not his main skill set. At Michigan, when you're facing Big Ten linemen, their arms aren't quite as long. You can get away with bull rushing and throwing them around. In the NFL, that's just not going to work. And I think that he's starting to learn that very quickly. I think Dan Campbell realizes that, and that's why he's going to have Aidan Hutchinson play in a 2-point stance instead of a 4-point stance, so standing up on the edge. And I think that's absolutely the right move. That's the kind of player Aidan Hutchinson is. And it's really just about getting the technique down for his particular skill set, because he's not going to be a pure bull rusher. If we wanted that, you take Trayvon Walker, although we didn't really have a chance to get him, because he was taken number 1 overall. His arms are extremely long. I think they're like 35.5 inches. But there's been a lot of myths perpetrating about Aidan Hutchinson. One of the biggest one is that he looks physically overwhelmed, which I heard Mike Valenti say on the radio. That's not true. You watch all of his highlights. Are there a couple plays he gets blown back? Sure. But there's tons of plays, too, where he's taking the lineman, throwing him to the ground. There were a couple times he did that to Noah Fant. He's been very stout on run defense for the most part this year. And I haven't really seen him get blown back by some of the good offensive tackles that he's faced. So, no, he hasn't looked physically overwhelmed. His bull rushes are actually getting push. There was one play he literally took the left tackle, Lucas, and almost pushed him into Geno Smith. But, of course, Geno Smith's first read was open, so he just went, boop. That's another theme, too. This back seven is so terrible that Aidan Hutchinson literally doesn't have time to get sacks. If we're using a four-man rush, none of those guys have time to get sacks unless they went immediately off the line, which is very, 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 very unlikely. The fact is there are times they have opportunities to make moves and make sacks, but Geno just gets rid of the ball so quickly, it doesn't matter. So, no, I'm not trying to make excuses for Hutchinson. But the fact is, I don't know any defensive player that can get sacks with that little time to get to the quarterback. So Hutch is the kind of player, yes, he's not going to win immediately off the line. But if our defense just gets a little bit better in the secondary, and Hutch gets a couple more seconds, maybe even just one more second, to get after the quarterback, I think we're going to see a much better football player and a guy that was more representative of his senior year at Michigan. You know, that 14.5 sack guy. But Alex Anzalone can't cover, Omari Oruwariye can't cover, and right now that's just what we have to deal with. It's going to be a problem for the rest of the season. Got to be something we address in 2023. So I'm getting a little bit tired of the Brad Holmes slander. I understand our defense is really bad, but we have to remember a couple things. Number one, Brad Holmes has had no cap space to operate with since he's been with the Detroit Lions. You can thank Bob Quinn for that one, and Matt Patricia as well. The fact is, when you have $3 million in cap space, what the heck can you do? We're not going to be over the salary cap and taking the draft fees, you know, just so we can barely sneak into the wild card. That doesn't make any sense. And the other thing, too, and this is the only thing that I think is valid against Brad Holmes, is that he has drafted players with injury history. But looking back on it, it does make some sense. If you got a player that you know is really good but might not be ready to play this year, you know what? This team isn't winning a Super Bowl this year. This team is not in win now mode, whether we want to admit it or not. This team was not ready yet, and I think everybody knew that. Some of us wanted to admit it more than others, but this team's not ready to splurge yet. So why not take guys that are hurt, that maybe fell in the draft because of their injury, but at the same time, if they weren't hurt, would be back. So yes, it is a little bit of a risk, but guys like Josh Pascal, guys like James Mitchell, I would say, those kind of guys would have been picked earlier had it not been for their injury. And same with Jameson Williams as well, of course. So all these guys, and even Aidan Hutchinson too, Brad Holmes is drafting for the future. That's what he's been doing, not for now. And I can't really say I'm against it. Now, 2023, I think that's where we got to look for immediate impact players. And I do think that there are some immediate impact guys in the draft. Will Anderson. But for now, I think that taking a chance on a guy that could be really good but might not be ready to go this year, like Josh Pascal, makes some sense. This wasn't the year yet. Next year, when we have the cap space, and we'll probably will also have a good draft pick, meaning in good trap position, plus an extra pick from the Rams. That's when we got to think about, all right, we got to elevate ourselves to a playoff contender, because now we have the resources and the means to do it, whereas we didn't then. And you know, I hear everybody complaining about Anzalone and some of these other guys. Look, Brad is basically trying to find diamonds in the rough. You know, he's hoping that he buys a diamond with a dime. That's all I can really say. And obviously the likelihood of that is very low. So fact is, this is just a filler product. And this is what Bob Quinn did to us by ruining our financial situation. It is what it is. And if you're mad about some of Holmes' picks, you know what? No GM hits on every pick. I understand. I actually disagreed with the second-round pick of Onwuzurike. That's one I disagreed with. But he picked Lee McNeil, and that looks like a pretty good pick right now. And the Sun God, that was an excellent pick. So Brad has made some picks that have missed, and Brad has made some excellent picks so far. So I'm still 100% on his side. I expect 2023 to be a little bit more active, and I think he will be. I think he knows exactly what he's doing. There's a plan. There was a 3 to 4 year plan to get this thing fixed, and we're getting closer, but we're not quite there yet. So take a deep breath. Realize it's not the worst thing in the world that we're not going to make the wild card this year, and it might actually be a blessing in disguise. And we've got exactly what we need. And Aidan Hutchinson is one of those pieces that's going to be a key part of this team in the future. I guarantee it. All right, thank you all for watching. Go Lions, and you all have a good night.